PA. I love you guys. You know the two reasons I love you guys. One, all these friendly faces and people that I love and know come back year after year. That's why I love you. The second reason I love you is I know we're closing in 2.5 months. You guys are one of the 7 warning signs I get to go to Florida. And I have to give today, when these people stop by my desk and say, hey, have you heard that historical lecture? Is that guy any good? I'm like, yeah, well. I told him I've been to all of his lectures, every one of them. I've never missed one. Not yet. Are we treating you guys all right? Are we having fun? Yeah. Oh, stop. How many people have taken this lecture before? We can narrow this room down a little bit. Get out. And the rest of you are new victims. I love it. Well, those of you that know the lecture, I'm going to give you the disclaimers up front. It's a little different than most lectures. One, I hate interpretive history. I hate names and dates and architectural doodads and all the things that made us hate history in college and high school. I love first-hand history. I love eyewitness history. So a lot of this comes from cards and letters and postcards and journals. You know, some great historian said that interpretive history is a bunch of stuff that didn't happen, written by about a bunch of people that weren't there. I like stuff that actually happened in this hotel. And I love to tell the story through the stories of the people, as opposed to just a chronological order. The people believed in this institution against unbelievable odds for our mere survival. And the survival of this place, the rarity of this building that you guys are sitting in, I'm going to beat you to death with this figure because it's so important to me. At the turn of the century, by 1904, there was over 1,200 large wood frame hotels in the United States. Over 1,200 big ones, 200 rooms or more. 2/3 of those built by transportation companies, just like we were, to create grand destinations to get these wealthy Victorians out of the hot, dirty cities. Here's the rarity. Of the 1,200 that existed, there's 12 left. Wow. There's 11 open. One's closed, and I've been trying I was going to spend part of the winter trying to save it. It's not looking good, so next year there might only be 11 standing. And the rarity of this place is we're the last privately owned one, family owned by multi-generations. So the story is not just names and dates and stuff. It's the people's stories that believed in us and how we adapted and to thrive and evolve through wars, depressions, changing in travel, changing in socioeconomic times. That's the kind of the story behind it. And the other thing is, if there's something we can't relate to, I try hard to kind of set the stage so you can understand why it was impactful for those people kind of at that time. That gives you a little flavor. I try to always stay away from too many facts. I like to put a little human interest into it. And from there, I'll recount from cards or letters or a piece of a journal so we can understand why it was impactful to that person back then. Excellent. But that's the whole lecture. Goodbye. No, I got to start the lecture. Tourism started as a trickle. First regularly scheduled sailing ships, 1830s. First lodging dealt to that point. First large hotel built to be a hotel was the Island House in 1852, so we weren't the first by any means here. I used to say, you know, this is one of the places where I'm going to kind of set a stage on why we were needed. I think that's important for you to understand who our guests were, what they were looking for, what we did well, what we did poorly. I mean, it'd be very simple for me to stand up here and say, oh, we built a big old white hotel in the middle of nowhere, we hope some folks might show up. That's not who we are. Who are our guests? And to do that, I'm going to give you a brief little rundown of how those guests made their money that necessitated this building, and that is the Second American Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution, if you will, created the guest that created the necessity to have these resorts built. Movers, shakers, robber barons, inventors, visionaries took advantage of this exploding technology, the steam age, the steel age. They turned our cities almost overnight into these industrial centers. And this small section of society, small group, made an enormous amount of money. And I mean an enormous amount of money. You know, I'm going to romanticize this whole Victorian period, that we were all wealthy and privileged and had all this mobility. It really wasn't. It was just a few people. It was hugely impactful. And it's hard for us to wrap our mind around the fact that when we opened our doors in 1887, there was almost no middle class in existence. The very, very wealthy, movers, shakers, robber barons, landowners, kind of a big gap in the world, the farm labor and the factory labor kind of at the other end. Many people think we were built for the movers and shakers and robber barons that made all this cash, this unbridled capitalism. You could make a fortune, you could keep a fortune. There was few restrictions, labor laws, pollution laws, very few taxes at the time. We really weren't. If you really study your history carefully, we were built for their children. Their children were the first group of people in the United States that were born into a substantial amount of money. They were born into wealth. They were born into privilege. They were very different from their parents. the movers and the shakers and the robber barons. They were born into privilege. They wanted to go and enjoy their privileges. It mirrored almost identically the English Industrial Revolution and their post-revolution prosperity. Basically, they set their own social mores, is the best thing I can say. It was okay to have money. It was socially okay to show your money, to travel, to have leisure time. They were the ultimate consumers. They showed their money through jewelry, clothing. My favorite thing is architecture. If you guys haven't had a chance to see some of the beautiful Victorian summer cottages on the east and west bluff, weather improves a little today, take a walk. They're beautiful. Victorian architecture was a way to show your station in life, asymmetric architecture. It was all about drama, these little matchstick castles that we build ourselves. You know, they were the ultimate keep up with the Joneses, too. I always say that. Of these first 9 Victorian cottages up here, only one is on its original footprint, because as your wealth grew and your neighbor's wealth grew, you had to show off. You know, if your neighbor got a porch, you build a bigger porch. They got a second porch, you got a tower, they got a turret, you got a widow's walk, you got some Fishkill works, some eyebrow dormers, a second porch, a porch on the back. You know, they turned these things that look like mansions up here, and they're still summer cottages. Another great injustice I would do to describing this period was, I would say, and there's some chairs up here if you guys are looking for a place. We got 2 here and 3 or 4 there. Was that the Victorians simply wanted to get out of the cities. Victorians didn't want to simply get out of the cities like we want to get out of the city. We work there, it's hustle and bustle. We want to go somewhere beautiful and relax and play some golf. Victorians want to get out of cities because they were probably the most miserable places you could be on the face of the earth during the summer. Cities were very different than the dynamic places we see today. When I talk about all this fun, and I'm going to talk about the frivolity of the Victorian period, least any of us in this room sitting here all comfortably in this beautiful hotel forget that all this money was made on the backs of some of the hardest labor and the hardest industry the United States has ever seen. Cities were filthy. It was 3 shifts of labor, 24 hours a day, raw coal, raw wood being burned, no pollution controls. It was hot, it was dirty, dusty, smelled bad. I have cards and letters from people that came to Mackinaw Island. The first thing they said about us, not a hint of dust or smoke in the air. That was the first thing they said. I have a letter from a guest that was from Chicago, hadn't seen the sun for 2 weeks because the dust and the soot and the dirt. A little something you guys can relate to. Coming to Mackinaw Island today, get off your boat, you're downtown, you're waiting for your taxi to come up to Grand Hotel. Even today, downtown Mackinaw Island, there are 2 things you smell, and only one of them's fudge. Am I right? Right. And we're down. We were like 600 horses peak season. We're down to about 400 something horses right now. When we opened our doors in '87, legally licensed on the streets of Chicago, and I love Chicago, I love to pick on them, they had over 40,000 horses. They had another some 40,000 that were not legally registered. The city records show that during a heat wave in the city of Chicago, as many as 5,000 to 10,000 horses per week would be left dead on the dirt streets. And I love Chicago, but their second most, the first business there was certainly fur trading, but the second business that really put Chicago on the map was the packing houses, the slaughterhouses, the Union stockyards. The Union stockyards were right in the middle of the city of Chicago. In 1890, they slaughtered 2.2 million cattle in the center of their city without refrigeration. It was hot, it was dirty, it smelled bad. Victorians wanted to get out of cities. What was the single most revolutionary thing to come out of the Industrial Revolution? Hands down, changed the face of the United States, still does today. Transportation, moving of people, railroads in particular. Railroads were spiderwebbing out across the United States at just literally breakneck speed, miles per day. By 1900, there was 200,000 miles of railroad track in place in the United States. And the Victorians started coming out of the cities. Let's talk about the human side of this. What was it like if you lived in the city to take one of these trains? What was it like? You know, we're all jet-setter travelers all over the place. In the city, you had walked, you'd taken a horse, a taxi cab, horse-drawn, maybe one of those new safety bikes that came over from England with the same size wheels, front and rear. Here's this machine, this giant, belching, powerful machine, and these 2 silver rails to take you at just an amazing rate of speed out of this hot, dirty city with the windows down and the air, taking you to all these towns, all these exotic places. You know, I love little towns too, and little hotels, and the evolution of transportation there. So I've got a collection of those postcards, and I read about on these postcards these little towns, and they describe them as these exotic places. And I go there, and they're not that exotic. You know why? Because every place was exotic. Think about this figure. This figure still blows my doors off. And by 1900, the majority of Americans were born, worked, lived, and died within 50 miles of one spot. That's exploding overnight. People are taking these trains. What about these little cities? This is a good thing. Man, the train's coming. We got a railroad stop. We have built a depot. We are connected with the commerce, the travel, the transportation. This is a financial boom for our little town. Wonderful. What happened when the railroad started catering to these Victorians? Victorians wanted to get out of cities. They had a lot of money. George Pullman started building the private railroad car, the Palace Car Company. These beautiful little private little railroad cars, apartments on wheels, if you will. And these Victorians are leaving the cities and they're being catered to. What happened to these towns when the Victorians got there? When these wealthy people got off these trains in their town? What do we do with them? Where do we feed them? Where do we house them? They have a lot of money. How do we keep them in our little town? Do I need to read that right now?
Whenever you have a minute.
Okay, I'm going to read it right now just to make sure here, just in case. How old is this lamp? Somebody get a note to Bob, you know. Anyway, these rich people show up in the town. They have a lot of money. We got to keep them there. How do we keep them there? How do we keep them there? What natural features can we show them? I'm giving you the whole reason this hotel is built. What natural features can we show them? How can we keep those people and their money on this boat? In this town. I'm messing it up with my message here. From getting on the train and going to the next town and the next town. If we don't have a grand destination, how do we build one? Folks, there's 2 seats right here and there's 2 seats right back over there if you guys are looking for seats. If there's not a grand destination, we have to create one. Of those 1,200 hotels that I just talked to you about, 2/3 were built by transportation companies to create these grand destinations. And we are one of those. That's how we came about. The Great Lakes also has the ships. They started out as sailing ships, side wheelers, stern wheelers, the giant cruise ships, the steamers.